This story happened many years ago. I was 19 years old and lived with my parents at home in a fairly bad neighborhood. At the time, I had a very large, loving dog that was half Great Dane and half English Mastiff, who was the sweetest little angel you could ever meet, but very huge. We're talking over 5 feet on her hind legs and well over 100 pounds. It was one late night, and I decided that in the middle of the night, I wanted to go to the local 24-hour grocery store to get a few snacks. At the time, I didn't own a car, but I did have my license, and my father had a car. Since I was young, I figured I could take the car for a drive the few miles to the store, pick up my snacks, and be back having the car in the driveway before anyone knows I'm gone. The only issue was I knew my dog would start barking and crying if I left her alone and went to the store. So I decided that I would take her with me and leave her in the car. Since it's the middle of the night, I know it's not going to be hot, and all will be well. I get to the store and get out and pick up a few snacks, pay the total, and head back to the car. It's the early 2000s, and my keys are on a lanyard around my neck. As I am walking quickly towards my father's car, I notice in my peripheral vision there's a man who has gotten up from a bench on the side of the building. I hear him say something, but I don't turn around and have no clue what it was. I start to quicken my pace, and I wonder if I'm being paranoid. By the time I open my car door, this man was in full sprint towards me. I slam the car door shut, and before I can even lock the door, I see a hand slam on my window, full palm. In the next split second, my beautiful, amazing, huge dog lunges from the passenger seat across my driver's seat towards the window, with teeth and barking, and I had never seen her act like that. Then I hear an, "Oh crap," before the man disappeared off into the darkness. I got home safe that night, and nothing came out of it. The neighborhood and the stores around are notorious for panhandlers and theft/robberies, so I can't tell you for sure what that person wanted from me. I don't know if they wanted to hurt me or if I was just overreacting. What I can tell you is that I'm very glad I had my dog with me that night. Who knows what would have happened if I didn't. Let me start this by saying I was only 16 years old and most likely shouldn't have been working third shift in the first place. I worked at a local grocery store and I absolutely hated it. When I got the offer to move to third shift working stock crew and cashier, I jumped on the offer. It was in the middle of winter, February to be exact. I remember this well because this year in question, it happened to be snowing on Valentine's Day. I was shoveling my porch at home and slipped off and broke my ankle, so this meant when I was at work, I had to sit on a stool to work at the self-checkout. This night was a particularly cold night, and it was around 3 a.m., maybe 4 a.m., and I recognized a familiar face that came in. It was the same homeless man who came in nearly every night, and he was trying to buy alcohol. We weren't allowed to sell alcohol after 2 a.m., and I told the man that he couldn't buy it. Of course, this made him enraged, and he started calling me really ugly names, and he told me that I was going to ring him up or he would hurt me. I explained to him that it wasn't just me who wouldn't allow him to purchase the alcohol. The system literally wouldn't allow it to be purchased. At this time, I abruptly remembered that my ankle was messed up. What was I going to do? Hobble away from him? The guys who worked stock crew with me were so far away that they wouldn't even hear me if I screamed. I started reaching for the phone that we used as an intercom for the store, and I pushed the button that is on the receiver. I started yelling for somebody to come up to the front, and as soon as I did, he then told me, "You just made a huge mistake." As soon as he said that, he punched me right in the face and knocked me off my stool. I don't know if I blacked out or just blacked out this part of the memory, but I don't remember what happened next, except for when I opened my eyes, my manager had him up against the wall and knocked him upside the head, and he told him he wasn't going anywhere until the cops came. I was so scared. My face hurts, my ankle hurt, and now my butt literally hurts from hitting the floor. The cops came and I made my report, and he was arrested, but that didn't stop him from coming to our store, even though he was banned. He came in and taunted me for months after the attack. I would look up from my cash register and just see him looking at me with his eyes looking almost evil. I felt like I constantly had to look over my back. I felt like every time I looked up, he was going to be there, and I wasn't sure what he was going to do next. Every time I think about this story, I still get upset that something as little as alcohol could make a man punch me. A man that I had seen every day since I started working third shift, and he was honestly a friendly guy. Well, until then. I worked there for about another year, but I honestly never went back to that store after I finally left. It still gives me the heebie-jeebies, even 11 years later. When I was in college, I worked at an after-hours emergency clinic. My shift ended at midnight, and since the stores were pretty much less crowded at that hour, I often did grocery shopping around that time. Side note, I'm a female and I was in my early 20s when this happened. I go to the local store one night after work, park in a great spot, and head towards the store. As I'm walking across the lot, I hear a male voice calling,
"Excuse me, ma'am. Excuse me."
I look to my right and see a man sitting in a blue station wagon, about 5 spaces away from where I'd parked. Having my attention now, he then says,
"I'm sorry to bother you. My wife and I are trying to get home, but we've run out of gas. She's in the store now asking people for help. Could you spare a few dollars so we can get gas to go home?"
Now, normally I don't mind helping out someone who's down on his luck, but something just felt so nope about this whole situation. I replied that I was sorry, but I didn't have any cash. I went into the store to grab the few things I needed, and the whole time I was inside, I could just not shake the uneasy feeling I had. I was completely on edge by the time I made it to the checkout line. After I paid for my items, I started to walk out, but my body just didn't want to cooperate. I'd take a few more steps, and then I'd stop again. I turned back to the male cashier and then said, "I know I'm about to sound like such a girl, but could you see if someone would walk me out to my car? There was a really creepy guy out there earlier, and I just don't feel comfortable." He took some of my bags in his hands, and he said he'd walk me out since he didn't have any customers. To exit the store, you have to go through 2 sets of sliding double doors. We walked through the first set, and I completely stopped cold. The freaking station wagon was now parked next to my car. I told the cashier this, and he told me he wouldn't let anything happen to me. We walked through the second set of double doors, and I start walking towards my car. About this time, the station wagon starts up, and the driver immediately pulls out of the parking spot. It was then that I noticed that there was no wife in the car, but there was another man. I don't know what these guys were planning to do, and I'm really glad I never had to find out. I'm very fortunate that that cashier was so nice enough to be my bodyguard. There's really no telling what would have happened if I went to my car alone. After putting it off for the last few and busy days, I decided to go to my local grocery store at around 9 p.m. last evening. My dad was at my house fixing a few things, and my 2 children were already in bed. As any single mom would agree, getting to go grocery shopping alone is a rare treat, and I jumped on the chance while my dad suggested I go while he was helping out. I once get to the store and quickly realized that I picked a great time to go. The parking lot was near empty, and once I got inside, I only saw a handful of store workers chatting at one of the registers in front. Not another customer in sight. Glorious. About halfway through my shopping, I noticed another customer. First one I'd seen. He was an older dude, gray around the sides and wearing what appeared to be hunting gear. Boots, camouflage pants, and a matching jacket. His hat was also camouflage, but a different type than his other clothing. I remember noticing his outfit right away, but didn't think anything of it. As I made my way through the aisles, I kept noticing that this dude would end up in the same aisle as I was. It seemed kinda weird as we were the only customers in our smaller local store at the time, so I thought to myself, how weird that this guy is on the same aisle route as me. But as minutes went on, I began to notice that this guy wasn't actually taking items off of shelves. He didn't have a cart, he had a basket, and that basket was empty. Every time I'd glance at his general direction, he'd snap his head down or to the side, making it super obvious that he was staring at me. I was starting to be a bit weirded out, but I thought I was being paranoid. I reminded myself that I'd seen a few employees when I entered the store, so it wasn't just me and Camo Guy in the store. I continue my shopping. This is where I thoroughly get creeped out. This guy was standing in the center of the aisle. He wasn't facing either side of where the products lined the shelves, but facing up the aisle, so when I rounded the corner, he was directly facing me. What really scared me was that he was smiling. Not just any smile though, it was this terrifying wide grin. dead center of the aisle, about midway through, with a wild smile on his face and not moving a single muscle, like a statue. I looked at him for what felt like an eternity, but was in reality probably only a few seconds. My brain just couldn't comprehend what the crap was going on here. There was no way I'd be getting past this guy without having to interact or at least say excuse me. Super freaked out, I quickly turned my cart around and I decided to make a beeline for the cash registers down a different aisle. Forget the English muffins and pitas, I wasn't going to bring those home tonight. As I get to the register and begin unloading my groceries onto the belt, the woman standing at the end of the register in the bagging area looked up from the conversation with the cashier and calmly and sweetly asked, "Hey, is everything okay?" I'm guessing I looked white as a ghost or like I was going to hurl or something. Just as I opened my mouth to describe the man in aisle 12, there was loud footsteps, running footsteps, in conjunction with the weirdest, most guttural type scream I had ever heard. It sounded almost like a howl. I wish I knew how to properly convey the sound through text. And it's the guy. Out of the corner of my eye, I see that he's running down the front area of the store behind where the baggers stand and people leave. Here's the kicker. He stops in his place about 4 to 5 feet behind the bagger. He stops yelling for a moment and just blankly stares. No words, abrupt stop to the scream/yell. He stopped dead in his tracks and just stared in our general direction. He had a weird look in his eyes. I pulled my phone out at this point because truthfully I didn't know if this guy was on something or what he would do next. From the look on her face, the cashier was also creeped out. Then, just as quickly as he stopped, he started screaming again and started running again. He ran right out of the doors of the store. Another cashier got out from behind his register and kinda followed his path, looking out the front window into the parking lot. He turned around and then said, "I don't see him anywhere." This would have only been a mere seconds after he ran out the doors. That same cashier walked me to my car, helped me unload my groceries, and watched as I drove away. It was very clear he was just as shaken as I was over the howling and the guy's actions in front of the store. I told him about how I'd seen that man frozen in a big weird smile just before coming to the registers. He visibly shivered. It's taken me until this morning to truly realize just how strange this whole situation actually was. So to that grocery store howler, please do your shopping when I'm not around. This unsettling encounter happened when I was 11. I should mention that I was not a mature 11-year-old, as I was still very much a little kid at that age, and definitely looked the part. Messy hair, small and gangly, and no signs of puberty yet. So there was absolutely no way anyone could possibly mistake me for anything but a little kid, which is important to the story. Anyway, one evening my mom took me grocery shopping with her. We were in the meat department when all of a sudden one of the employees came up to us and started chatting with my mom. He looked to be in his early to mid-20s and he was asking my mom all kinds of questions about me. How old I was, where I went to school, if I had a daddy, and he kept staring at me and saying what a beautiful little girl I was. I just thought he was being nice, and I couldn't understand why my mom was being so bothered. So he followed us around the store while we shopped and kept talking to her even though my mom was clearly trying to ignore him. He kept asking where I went to school and my mom would only say, "I don't know the name of her school." I interrupted and began to tell the school that I go to, not realizing why she was playing dumb. He smiled, knelt down, and asked if he could hold me. My mom just grabbed my hand and started power walking away while pushing the cart with her other hand. By now I knew something was wrong and I was getting scared. I'd never seen my mom like this before. She was tight-lipped and pale and was totally angry. She quickly paid for our groceries and dragged me out of the store. He then followed us out to the car. He asked my mom if we needed help loading our groceries in the trunk, and she just snapped. She yelled at him to leave us alone or else she would call the manager. He finally backed off, and on the ride home I got yelled at for telling him what school I went to. My mom was nearly in tears at this point, and she told me that he was a dangerous man and to tell my teachers right away if I ever saw him in or around my school. She had always taken me to school and picked me up, but she walked me inside to and from class after that. It took me many years to figure out that this guy was a pedo, and he probably wanted to know where I went to school so he could abduct me. Thank God that never happened. I've worked at the same grocery store for the last 4.5 years of my life. Of course, I've seen some pretty crazy people come in and whatnot, but this absolutely takes the cake for me. It was a regular work shift for me as a cashier, with me working short amounts of hours whereas I was 16. I tended to keep the same schedule every week because I liked the days I worked, and it kept me on the ball, being in school and all. Since I worked during the day on weekends, I usually would see the same few regulars, which was not uncommon at all for me. There was one customer that usually stood out to me though. I never caught his name, but it was this older man, maybe in his late 60s I'd say. This same customer would come into my register lane every single week on the same day around the same times. Not only that, but he would also buy the exact same groceries every single week, and he would make me bag them to his liking. Honestly, I never even thought twice about this old man because he seemed pretty harmless and just super friendly. I was wrong. This one specific shift is where things went insanely south. I was on my register and I see him walking over per usual. He starts setting things on the belt. The normal conversation and whatnot, and then he asks when I go on my break. Not only did I not really know for sure, but even if I had, I wouldn't have given that information out to this stranger.
I have something in my car for you. You should come out on your break and take it. I'll wait for you.
Oh, I have no idea when I'm going to be going on break. It could be hours.
That's okay. You know what? I have a better idea. I will get it for you and bring it in here.
Now, I really didn't know how to take this situation, so I notified my manager about this interaction and to keep an eye out for him. Lo and behold, he comes right back in about 15 minutes with a manila folder in his hand. This customer stands right at the end of my lane and watches me for over an hour, just standing there waiting for me, not making small talk with other customers or even making eye contact. The manager has been watching him and finally pulls him aside and says it's time for him to leave. The customer explains that he has something for me, and he instructs my supervisor to give it to me when possible. My manager says of course, and he leaves. Mind you, my girlfriend is actually currently working in a separate department, and she's notified and comes over. I will never forget what I see next while I was still cashiering. My manager and my girlfriend open up the manila folder, and the color from their faces immediately drain. I see them shuffling through tons of papers until finally my girlfriend snatches the folder and rips it in two. My manager pulls me off the register, and he tells me what the man had left. It turns out he had written hundreds and hundreds of very inappropriate love poems for me, as well as about his deceased mother. This man had been obsessed with me. I felt really sick to my stomach and I wanted to throw up immediately. Later on, the police come and they ask me some questions about the incident, and I give them my statements and such. They eventually found him on our camera system from earlier that day, and they had enough evidence to give me the option to file a restraining order on him, as well as legally banning him from our store. The police eventually contacted him, and when they asked him to confirm what he was trying to give me, he instantly hung up after talking for some time with the cop. I haven't seen this man since, thank God, and I never plan to again. My family is from a very small southern town. They've always lived around here, and in the early 70s it was kind of the place where everyone knew all of their neighbors. My grandpa owned his own grocery store. It was called Bill's Food Center. Everyone in the town would come by regularly and get their groceries and even stay and chat with him for a little bit. My mom had worked the cash register regularly from her early teens on, so she knew all of the regulars and she could always tell when someone hadn't been there before. So when two men came in that she had never seen before, she made sure to welcome them and asked if they needed help finding anything. She said that she remembered being very creeped out by them from the beginning. She asked if they needed help finding anything, and the older one replied,
"Nah, sweetie, we'll let you know when we find what we need."
As they checked out, the older man, who she described as mid to late 30s, kept asking her increasingly personal questions. She was polite but tried to give really vague general answers. The younger man with him was in his early 20s and never spoke, just always went along with what the other man said. They came in for items every day for about 4 days, and they always creeped her out, but she never felt threatened or too weirded out until the last day. The older man said he could use some help now and explained that they were going on a camping trip and needed some help picking out some supplies. He said that they needed some really strong rope and some duct tape. He explained that he liked to shoot guns and needed the duct tape to wrap around his hands while shooting. She felt that the explanation was odd, but nevertheless, she helped them pick out the supplies and check them out. She got such bad vibes from them that day that when they left, she made sure to memorize their license plate just in case. A few days later, a cashier at another local store down the street from my grandpa's went missing. After searching for a few days, the police found her body near a local river. She was bound with duct tape, barbed wire, and rope, almost exactly like what my mom remembered selling the two men. When she read about it in the Sunday paper, her stomach dropped. She immediately felt that she knew the two men were responsible. She told my grandpa she knew who was responsible. She knew the two strange men were somehow involved. My grandpa was skeptical at first, but my mom was so adamant that he eventually caved and they went to the police. My mom was then questioned extensively by a detective. It took some time, but the police eventually caught up with the men, and they were eventually found guilty. My mom was so shaken up about the whole ordeal that she refused to work in the store alone from then on. She was even more alarmed when the police informed her that the men were casing my grandpa's store before ultimately deciding on the other one. Growing up as a young lad and just learning to drive, my advisor told me the number one rule when entering a vehicle: check the back seat. I'm not sure if he was being genuine or if he was simply trying to spook me, but this number one rule was always check the back seat of the vehicle which you're about to drive, as to not have some weirdo creep up on you. Thinking back on it now, I really wish I had taken him more seriously. I had just gotten my very first car, a running and well taken care of 2004 Pontiac Grand Prix. Now, my family isn't exactly one that has a lot of money, but we were able to acquire this car at a pretty decent price. At 170k miles, it will make for a decent starter vehicle. Growing up in Minnesota, the atmosphere was never really anything unnerving, but the winters were very harsh. This particular winter reached -30 degrees. It wasn't anything wonderful. I'm definitely not one for snow, but I always wondered why I was born in Minnesota. Although the large cities are usually a lot worse than where I lived, the town I was in didn't fare all that well for me either. It was the end of a work week for me. As a student who just acquired their very first vehicle, I was working my tail off in order to pay my parents back for the money they dropped on this car for me. I was working between 30 to 40 hours a week with school. I worked at a grocery store. The store wasn't a multi-million-dollar store by any means. It was a ma and pa owned grocery store only known to the people of the town that I lived in. They opened at 6 a.m. and closed at 10 p.m. I was usually working until close after I got out of school. This particular night, I didn't get out of there until around 10:45 to 11 p.m. due to a delivery truck which ran late, and I had to get products on the shelf by the end of the night. As I left the store and entered my car that night, I remembered that I forgot to clock out. If I didn't clock out, I would have to go through the process of signing a sheet saying that I didn't clock out and my projected hours would be all funky, and it wasn't something I wanted to deal with. Getting out of my car and heading back towards the building, I saw some man walking around the parking lot. I made sure to do that fast-paced walk that everyone does when they get anxious in order to reach the front door without attracting too much attention from the strange man. Unlocking the front door, I looked back and saw that the man continued his walk across the parking lot, but he had craned his neck back in order to watch me. Every hair on my body stood on end, and I got really creeped out. I watched way too many scary shows and movies at the time, and everything cast a pretty bad feeling upon me. I unlocked the door and made my way inside and took a few deep breaths in order to slow my heart rate. Okay, just clock out, do your thing, and get back to your car and you're golden. I run to the back and do just as I needed to, straighten up a few things which I had previously overlooked while doing my cleaning up for the night, and went back outside to my car. As I unlocked the door, I did a quick sweep of the parking lot, and the strange man was gone. Nowhere to be seen. Thank God, I didn't have to worry about him anymore. I did a quick walk to my car, opened the door, and sat down with an anxious shiver. I slid the key in the ignition, started my car, and fiddled with the radio for about a minute before switching it into reverse and looking into my rear view to make sure I wasn't going to hit anyone in this empty parking lot. What I saw in my rear view wasn't a car or a set of headlights, but instead, it was a pair of eyes looking right back at me. Never in my life have I jerked around so quickly. My heart felt like it exploded in my chest and my stomach did a 920. I threw it in park and pretty much crawled out of my car since my quick-moving feet couldn't find traction. I ran about 100 feet before turning around to see the man opening the back door of my car take a step out and stroll out of the parking lot. He never looked back at me, he just kept walking. I get on the phone and call my parents and I told them everything. I had to explain myself a few times due to my fast, anxious talking and my shivering from the crisp air. They ended up calling the cops for me, and I had to re-explain myself to an annoyed-looking, rather heavy-set officer. They searched my car, and they ended up finding a needle and a twine string in my back seat. The man was a junkie. Holy crap. Never in my life had I thought I would come into contact with a tweaker in my town. I knew they existed, but never had I thought one would have this much impact on me. I ended up selling my car due to my anxiety getting the best of me every time I entered that car from that point on. From now on, I will absolutely check my back seat before ever getting into any car.
One day I stopped at the grocery store on my way home from the community college I go to. I went to the store all the time, and so I didn't think that this trip would be any different. I parked my car. I walked into the area inside the store where the carts are and took one. Right as I was about to turn around to walk in the main doors and start shopping, a man walked up to me. I noticed he was wearing reflective gear and I could see the store logo on part of his jacket, so I immediately recognized him as one of the cart collectors. He looked like he was about 60 years old. He told me he had seen me around lately and he wanted to know my name. His tone was friendly, and I'm more on the introverted side, so at this point, I thought the fact that I was already uncomfortable was just because that's how I am, and it didn't even faze me until later how weird it is for a 60-year-old man to tell a 19-year-old girl that you've seen them around. My mind naturally veers towards, let's get out of this conversation with a stranger as quick as possible without actually getting the chance to really process what they said to me. So, I told him my first name. He told me his. Then, he started asking how old I was, if I lived around here, if I was in school right now. I awkwardly answered these questions and was as vague as I could be. At this point, I was extremely uncomfortable with the situation, even though he was still presenting everything as normal and friendly. It was in the middle of the day, so it was less busy and nobody was really around. I held onto the cart in a way that implied I'd like to go into the store now and move on with my life, and he recognized this, but then said something along the lines of, "Next time you're here, we should exchange numbers or something." And then he made some coy comment about how he'd like to have a friendship, but it wouldn't be a relationship because that would be weird. I didn't really remember the specifics of that comment because my short-term memory tossed that shit away immediately. I didn't have the guts to tell him no, but I knew at this point that I'd be making an effort to not run into him again, so I told him sure and walked into the store. So many things I could have done differently in this situation, but hindsight's 20/20, I guess. In the store, I was pretty shaky. I was processing. I actually ended up walking up to a girl who had helped me find stuff in the past who worked there, telling her what happened and basically just needing validation that what had just happened was inappropriate. I knew it was, but I needed that extra person to tell me, so I'm grateful that she was kind enough to listen and tell me, yeah, that's really freaking weird. I bought the few things I needed. I thankfully did not run into him again on my way to the car. When I got home, I immediately called the store and told the manager what happened. Before I even told the manager his name, he basically implied that he already knew the employee I'd encountered. This made me ask if the cart collector had done this before, and the manager said no. So, I don't know if the manager just can't tell me those kind of things, or maybe he had a record before he even started working there, or maybe it was both. I'm not sure. Either way, the manager told me that they would do something about this. I have yet to find out what they did because I haven't gone back to that particular store since.
Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed today's video. And if you have your own personal scary story, be sure to submit that to my subreddit at reddit.com/r/southerncannibal or to my email at southerncannibal co.ag@gmail.com. I'm always looking for new stories. And before we bring this video to a close, I just want to shout out all of my $5 or more patrons, as well as my $3 or more patrons featured on screen. Shout out to Babe Lincoln, Beth A, Kate E, Celeste S, Ellie S, Emily W, Heather B, Howard R, Jacqueline W, Jazzy G, Jonathan C, Lori J, Matthew B, Michael G, Random Randy, Steph L, Tammy S, and Terry H. Thank all of you so much for supporting me on Patreon. I really appreciate it more than you know. And if any of you would like to join these awesome people and also become a patron, head over to my Patreon at patreon.com/southerncannibal. Thank you, everyone, and have a good one. And remember to always stay